relation to title and commencement. David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And on that note, I'd like to just start off by responding to what the Minister was talking about in relation to his response to us saying that we were making it up. And I just wanted to point out a couple of figures that, of course, we all agree on in this House, and that is $16.7 billion deficit in a matter of 3 years, going from a $5 billion surplus. Nobody would disagree with that. The only thing that people would have difficulty with, I think, is understanding how on earth that actually happened. How did we go from a $5 billion surplus to a $16.7 billion deficit in the space of 3 years? And the other people on the other side will say, well, actually, it's all about the earthquake. Well, actually, the earthquake, by even Treasury estimates, will say it was in fact 10%. Less than 10% of that deficit is made up by the Christchurch earthquake. It will be described because of the global financial crisis, but we know that the global financial crisis, it can't in any way account for that level of difference between $5 billion to $16.7 billion. And Mr. Chair, a lot of it can be attributed to mismanagement. The changes that this government has brought in, and that includes the changes to the taxation system. And the changes to the taxation system included borrowing for the latest tax cuts. And I'd like to hear the Minister comment on that, because that's one of the things that Treasury came up with in the last budget statement of last year. And that's another point, Mr. Chair, because a lot of the discussion today has been about the future projections, and I wonder really when we talk about whether we're making up figures, whether we can actually believe some of these projections. And this has been commented on before. The difference between, for example, the Minister's ministry, which is the IRD, and the Treasury forecasts, which are grossly and different to the IRDs. Who do we believe here? I would actually be more tempted to believe the IRDs, Mr. Chair, but simply because they seem to be founded on a greater degree of certainty than Treasury. And I look at the Treasury figures that Standard & Poor's actually talked about. And why Standard & Poor's goes along with them, I don't know. But that's certainly what the Prime Minister has led us to believe that this budget is all about, satisfying Standard & Poor's. But Standard & Poor's also said that the budget foresees an operating deficit of $16.7 billion, 8.4% of GDP, yet only 6 months ago the half-year economic and fiscal update was forecasting $11 billion, 5.5% of GDP. And yet the Treasury forecasts looking out for the next 3 years is extraordinarily rosy. And my question really is, why on earth are we prepared to accept those forecasts on which this budget is founded? Why are we prepared to accept those figures? So the other thing that I just wanted to bring up, and it comes directly to the purpose of this bill, is to look at the KiwiSaver, and we've had many speakers talk about how that KiwiSaver has been halved, has been gutted, and yet the Minister and the Chair was talking just a little while ago, a week or two ago on Q&A, when he said that, or maybe it was just last week, that he needed to make sure, and I quote, KiwiSaver survives and is sustainable and is politician-proof in the future. And he's right. But
sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for the luncheon adjournment. This debate is interrupted. The committee is suspended until 2 p.m.